Hi, my name's James Griffiths. Welcome back to the channel. And today we're going to be looking at favourite Synthy tracks. So this is songs or tracks that have predominant synthesizers on them. Now Chris at the Vinyl Orchard beat me to the punch with this. He's recently uploaded a video, but his is a bit different. Chris has got a great selection. He chose 30 of his favourite synth pop tracks or songs. And he was very strict with himself. He was looking at it as a genre, synth pop. So the years he was looking at, I think it was 1979 to 82 or something like that. And he showed pretty much all the classics. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do synth pop as such. I'm just going to do great tracks that I love that have prominent synths on. So it's going to come from all avenues of the spectrum. In terms of crossovers with Chris, I think I've only got one crossover with him, so that's quite nice. So this can be a companion piece to Chris's video if you've seen that already, and if you haven't, do check it out. So what I've done, I've come up with, I think it's 16 tracks altogether, and rather than doing a ranking, I'm going to look at them in chronological order, so the order in which I first heard them, apart from the final two choices. For the final two, I'm going to have those as my two favourite ever Synthy tracks. Right, hope all that makes sense after that long preamble. So the first one, and I make no apologies for this, I do show this band all the time. First single ever put out by Squeeze, apart if you don't count the EP that they put out, was Take Me I'm Yours, which has a really great synth part in it. I think it's a Polymoog synth. The story here was that the album had been recorded with John Cale and all sorts of chaos had ensued. He'd left the premises and gone back to America, I think, or somewhere, and Squeeze stayed behind in the studio with the great engineer John Wood, and Glenn Tilbrook had brought a synth into the studio and wanted to try something different, so they recorded the song with the synth as the main instrument rather than the guitar, and it made for a really beguiling sound. I think it's got a bit of a drum machine playing at the start of this song, which runs through the song with the drummer Gilson Lavers playing on top of it, but definitely a synth-driven track, and it wasn't really a direction that they were going to pursue after that, with one or two exceptions. One of them being the opening track from this album, Slap and Tickle from the Cool for Cats album, also has a great shuddering, droning synth part in it, which I think was inspired by I Feel Love by Donna Summer, and I think this is a bit of an underrated track because it's basically a kind of, if you imagine a mixture of Ian Dury and maybe Kraftwerk, you know, it's just kind of totally strange mixture of stuff, but great track. I think of the two of them, Take Me I'm Yours is the synth pop classic, but I had to have those two. And then I was trying to think, you know, what were the next few synth songs I discovered, and this one came very early. This one came in 1979, I think, when Brick in the Wall Part 2 hit the top of the charts in the UK. My dad played me this album, which he had in his collection, Dark Side of the Moon, obviously. And this comes with, I think, an absolutely mind-blowing synth track on side one, On the Run. Now, I think it's the VCS3 synth here. I can see it's credited here. David Gilmour, Rick Wright and Roger Waters are all credited with playing this, this synth. It didn't have a keyboard. It was just a kind of upright console with, you know, knobs on it that you could twist and turn. There's some footage of Roger Waters trying it out. I think it's in the Live in Pompeii film. And when the band first started to rehearse the track, they did it as a bit of a kind of straight rock performance, and it wasn't very inspiring. And then I think this synth was just lying around in the studio. They found it one day, started playing around with it, and they got this great juddering, just incredible kind of mind-blowing sequence of sounds out of it. I just love the kind of burbling, the really amazing, and then these incredible panned synthy sweeps that come there. I think it was meant to replicate the sound of cars vanishing into the distance. Just a mind-blowing piece of synthy sonic engineering. So had to have that one. And then the following year, or round about the same time, couldn't leave these guys out, and they're going to appear twice in my list. The Buggles, and this is the great album, The Age of Plastic. I could have chosen a few tracks from this record, but the one I'll go for is the one from the end of side one, which is called I Love You, Miss Robot, which is, it's definitely a Kraftwerk inspired song. There are quite a few songs from around about this time that had kind of robot themes. In fact, I'm going to show an album later which has another one. This one, I Love You Miss Robot, is dominated by, it's mainly bass guitar to be fair, but it does have some great orchestral style synth sweeps in the background and a very prominent vocoder. It's a brilliant piece of work. It definitely sums up this album and sums up the era. It's got a very melancholy sound as well. It's very difficult, I think, to program emotions into a synthesizer, but Trevor Horn and Jeff Downes definitely knew how to do it. This one, artistically, this one has become a bit of a touchstone, and you get all sorts of people showing this record. I think it's kind of known as being a bit of an influential synth track by an artist who really was just dipping his toes into the water, and he'd never particularly done it before, and he hasn't massively done it since, but I don't think you can have a great Synthy track video without mentioning Temporary Secretary by McCartney 2, one of two big major synth works on this record, the first being the studio version of Coming Up. But Temporary Secretary, which I think he's been playing again in his set recently, I could be mistaken. This one is now prized and extolled by, you know, modern day synth people, experimental music makers. It's based around a loop, and it's just incredibly inventive. I think this was McCartney, you know, bringing the Wings story to a close and really wanting to go somewhere else with his music than he'd been doing for the last few years, that rock band sound, wanting to stretch out. This album was meant to be a double album originally of just him just going mad up on the farm in Scotland with various synths, but in the end the album got cut down to a single one, and there's only a couple of tracks, 2 or 3 tracks, maybe 4 tracks altogether, which have a synth part prominently on display. But Temporary Secretary is certainly a great classic synth pop song. Couldn't leave that one out. Okay, this is number 5. This one, I've shown this a few times over the years. This is Jean-Michel Jarre. Actually, I think Chris had this as well. Chris had this one. I think it was the same version he had. I'm going to go with the opening track. This is the compilation by Jean-Michel Jarre, which I think came out in the 1980s, although this track dates back from before then. It's Oxygen 4. I first heard this at my uncle's house, my uncle Tony. Just went round to his house one day with my parents, totally randomly, and he was playing this. He just bought it on, and he was playing it on his record player, and he was really excited, and he said, "Listen to this," and we sort of went in and listened to it, and we never heard anything like it. I mean, you know, my dad and I both really, really rated it. We thought, wow, that's fantastic. So next time I was in town, we picked up this record, and my dad wasn't so fond of the rest of it, but this got played a hell of a lot in my bedroom back when I was a sort of early teenager. I didn't like all of it. I've never really developed a great passion for Jean-Michel Jarre, but Oxygen 4 and a few other tracks from this record definitely make my playlist of all-time great synth songs. So there we have it. Jean-Michel Jarre, the essential Jean-Michel Jarre, and Oxygen 4. Okay, coming in at number 6, although these are not rated, don't forget. Couldn't leave this album out. This is Time by ELO, which came out in 1981, although I didn't hear it until probably 1986, 87, when I was digging back through their catalogue, having not heard any of their records for years. And this album is a bit of a synth pop prog classic. It's all set in the future. It tells the story of a guy who's basically stranded in time. He's stranded in the future and he just wants to get back to 1981. There's a bit of a Buggles rip-off on here, which is the song Yours Truly 2095, which has a robot voice in it. It's very, very Buggles, I Love You Miss Robot, but it's great. It's got the big thunderous Bev Bevan drummers behind it. That's not the track I'm going to pick. The obvious one from this record is the one I've gone for, which is the big opening track, really, if you don't count the prologue, is Twilight, which just begins with these absolutely immense synthesizer flourishes, kind of da-da-da-da. Really, I mean, Jeff Lynne knew how to make a grand entrance in the 1970s. There were so many of those ELO albums that had a big, powerful entrance. You know, think of Fire on High on Face the Music. You had some synths again on the opening track of A New World Record, Tightrope, absolutely immense. So it wasn't the first time he'd done it, but I think on this album, he really went to town with the digital production, disowned it in later years, decided it wasn't really for him, but given that he wasn't all that into it, it's pretty amazing how accomplished this record sounds, and Twilight is definitely a rock synth classic of the first order. So there we go, Time from ELO. Now we go back to the Buggles again. I couldn't leave this album out. This is the second Buggles album, and at the time it came out, I actually didn't realise it had come out. I missed it completely. I only bought this album in 1986 when I found it second hand. This is mainly a Trevor Horn solo album. It's got Jeff Downes on a couple of tracks. I can't remember if he's on the track I'm going to pick from this. This album is a great synth album, but it's also, I mean, it's very piano-led, you know, acoustic piano, electric piano with bass guitar and sequence stuff on it, but there's some great synth stuff on it as well. The second track, Beatnik, is a great electro-pop song, I think, but it just has the most incredible synth solo in it, which I'm assuming was played by Jeff Downes. A very evocative song. You know, clearly we're talking Trevor Horn, who was the ultimate master of 80s synth music, Jeff Downes, who was a none too shabby talent as well, and between them they cooked up something special. Although I can't absolutely guarantee that Jeff Downes was involved in Beatnik, because I think only about 2 or 3 of the songs on this album had Jeff's involvement, but Beatnik, definitely a synth favourite. So there we go, that's the Buggles again, and this album was 1981, so we're still early 80s. Now, I couldn't leave this guy out. It was just a case of knowing which one to pick. So Thomas Dolby was a bit of a synth protege, a post-punk artist, I think, to be fair, but he built his own synthesizers, very original guy, had his own vision of how synths should be used. But he was also a great musician as well. He understood chord progressions, you know, and he was a big fan of Joni Mitchell. He understood how to put sort of jazzy chord progressions together, really, very harmonically rich and interesting music. But he did it in a kind of quirky, British, boffin-y kind of way. This track, She Blinded Me With Science, I'm not going to pick that because I think it's a little bit annoying and a little bit played out, and it tends to be, that and Hyperactive tend to be the only 2 songs by Dolby which anybody ever talks about. So I've got 2 12 inches here, but I'm going to go for the B-side of both of them. So with this one, the B-side of She Blinded Me With Science is One of Our Submarines, which comes from his first album, The Golden Age of Wireless, but I think it's only on the second pressing of the album. I don't think it was on the first pressing, and it is a fantastic, evocative synth pop song, pure synth pop, I would say. Great lyrics, just a wonderful atmosphere, very dark, very mysterious. And then this is the 12 Inch of Wind Power, which is a great track from that album. But again, I'm going to go with the B-side, which is an incredibly evocative song again, Flying North, which has a very distinctive and poppy synth part in it, and it's got a kind of orchestral grandeur to it, which quite a lot of Thomas Dolby's stuff had. Very catchy, but also very melancholy, and you know, something quite dark about it in a way, but also quite comforting. Thomas Dolby, an absolute master of the genre, went on to invent the polyphonic ringtone for mobile phones, so that was his next claim to fame. Right, this next one, I know Chris is not a fan of this band actually, but I think this is a fantastic synth epic. Scritti Politti from the album Cupid and Psyche. The third track is Absolute, which is just amazing. I mean, it's amazing that it wasn't produced by Trevor Horn. It does sound like an incredible Trevor Horn track, but we're talking just great vistas of synthesizers, and there's a wonderful bit in the middle, a kind of instrumental break. I think it's consisting of, it's probably the Fairlight synth playing samples of a telephone ringtone, and it's just so musical and so inventive. And the song has got a great kind of euphoric rush to it, absolutely brilliant. And it's amazing that Green Gartside, because he'd not really started out as a synth person at all. He'd started out in the post-punk scene. You know, Scritti were a post-punk band originally, kind of scratchy, angular kind of stuff. But for this album, he just went all-out synths. Some of it doesn't work. Some of it has got a bit of a dated sound. The brass stabs on this record are a bit nasty, but I think Absolute is an absolutely incredible piece of synth pioneering in a pop sense. Scritti Politti. So we're on number 10. This is a band that I've never been a big fan of, and to be honest with you, I probably only need this one album and a best of, but the really big famous track from this album is one of my favourite songs of the 1980s. I think it's just absolutely masterful, and this is Depeche Mode, the album Violator, and I'm going to go with the song Enjoy the Silence, which I think is the first song on side 2. which is a great song anyway, great lyrically, great musically, harmonically, but just the way that it's arranged for synthesizers, just the way that they sort of overlap all the different synth parts, and it kind of sweeps off into this majestic outro with incredible sounds and very cinematic, panoramic sense of what synthesizers could do. Almost proggy in a way, not really proggy, prog rock proggy, but progressive synth music. And we all know that Depeche Mode, they evolved quite quickly from a band that could have been dismissed as a bit of a techno pop flash in the pan into a band that were going to be huge in America and very, very inventive and clearly masters of the electronic synth kind of genre. But that's a great song, Enjoy the Silence, from Violator. Right, going to go to a quick cheeky CD. I don't have this album on vinyl, unfortunately, but we'll go with Wire, the post-punk band, who, when they first came on the scene in the late 1970s, they were another post-punk band. Their big famous album was Pink Flag, which was very scrubby, hard sounding, very abrupt. They made 3 albums in that style, disbanded, and then came back for a second phase in the 1980s, making beautiful electronic synthy dream pop with, I think, quite a lot of guitar synthesizers. And the track I'm going to pick from this album, this is the album A Bell is a Cup Until It's Struck, is called Follow the Locust, and I wouldn't mind betting that most of the synths on this are actually guitar synthesizers rather than keyboard synthesizers, but a bit like Depeche Mode, it's got a very panoramic, cinematic kind of sound, quite dark, quite epic, very mysterious lyric, and just great deep textures, electronic textures. Very, very clever piece of arranging and composition, and a great song really in a post-punk vein. Post-punk's doing electronic dream pop, and I think it was quite influential. I think this period of Wire's career is maybe as influential as the earlier part. I'm not entirely sure, but anyway, check that one out if you've not heard it. Follow the Locust from A Bell is a Cup Until It's Struck. Just a few more. This one is not an artist who gets any attention in his own right. I don't think I've ever seen anybody talking about him, but he was part of a very famous trio. This is one of several solo albums he made, and it came from the 1980s. So this is Robin Gibb and his album Secret Agent. Now, if you don't know this album, don't dismiss it out of hand. This is a really good synth pop album. The songs are co-written with Maurice Gibb, so it's Robin and Maurice Gibb on songwriting duty. So we're talking, it's the Bee Gees, it's 2/3 of the Bee Gees. Can't knock it, but it's just a pure, well, I say a pure electronic album. It does have guitars, but it's mainly synth. Robin's vocals get treated by vocoders and various electronic devices as it goes through, but it's all good pop hooks, all good stuff. Really, of its time, definitely, but good quality pop songwriting. And the song from this record that I'll pick is called Robot. So it's another one of these songs like I Love You, Miss Robot, and Yours Truly, 2095 by ELO. All these songs in the early 1980s about robots. If you've not heard that one, do check it out. Robot by Robin Gibb. It's a cracker. And this one, a prog band who, as the 1970s progressed, followed the pack really in trying to make their music more accessible, trying to bring it into more of a new wave sensibility. Many bands who tried to do that didn't really do it very well. I don't think this band did it all that well overall, but they did do a few nice things in the late 1970s into the early 1980s, which I do actually quite like. And this is Camel and the album I Can See Your House From Here, which is not a bad album at all. But the track from this that I absolutely love, and it's buried nearly at the end of side 2, it's the second to last track on side 2, is a synth pop song, and it's called Remote Romance. Again, I've got a feeling it's got vocoders in it, it's quite sample heavy. Is it samples at this point, or are they doing it are they still cutting tapes at this point? I'm not sure. It's very inventive, very quirky, not really anything like you expect Camel to be like. You think of Camel, all those albums from the 1970s, Mirage and whatever, the Snow Goose, and you've got a certain kind of sound in mind, guitar heavy, progressive. On this track, they just throw all that away, and it's just electronic voices, synthesizers, pop hooks. A very, very infectious song. When I first heard it, I thought, wow, that's fantastic. And You know, I can listen to it, you know, on repeat for up to half an hour. Just so catchy, and it has a real kind of joie de vivre about it. So had to include that one. That's Remote Romance by Camel. And this is the final one I'll show before my two favourites. So this is my most recent discovery in terms of synthy tracks. Gary Newman and his, I think it's his third solo album, and I bought this, did them last year. This is a really, really great album. The track I'm going to highlight from it is called Please Push No More, which again is the second to last song on side 2, so it's another buried one. And this song, for the first 2.5 minutes, there's not really any synths on it. It's just piano and voice, and maybe a bass guitar. Sounds beautiful, very elegiac, very melancholy, and it shows Gary's sensitive side, I think. I think he's a bit of an underrated artist. People tend to pigeonhole him as being one particular thing. I think there's more to him, and I think that's been recognised to an extent. But after about, I think it's 2 verses and 2 choruses, the synths come in, and it's just the classic Gary Newman synth sound, that very cold, Kraftwerk inspired kind of sound, but it's playing this just very simple, haunting melody, and it just works brilliantly with the piano underneath it. A great example of how a synth can be used to embellish a song rather than being used as the be-all and end-all of a song. Great, great song. So yeah, Please Push No More by Gary Newman from 1980. Amazing how many of these tracks come from that period. Okay, so the final two are not in chronological order, but they are my two favourite synth songs of all time. And to be honest with you, they could come in either order. I've got them in this order today, but they could swap round. But I'm going to go for my second favourite synthy track of all time, Art of Noise, and their great masterpiece Moments in Love, which is on this compilation. It says here it's the album version. I think it's that one I'm thinking of. One of my Desert Island discs, probably. A very beautiful, blissed out kind of sound, just goes round and just gorgeous textures and sounds, twinkling, fairlight magic, fairy dust. You know, Trevor Horn is absolute zenith. And this track was played to me by a friend of mine years ago when we were staying in a caravan on the North Welsh coast. I was with my parents and she was with hers, and she brought it along on a cassette and she played it for me, and we just spent the whole week on holiday listening to this song on repeat. You know, really, really beautiful, beguiling kind of sound. So yeah, that one is definitely one to be reckoned with. Moments in Love by Art of Noise. It could have come at number 1, but I'll put this at number 1 because, you know, I think this song, and this is one of the ones that Chris did have in his list, but I think he had it a bit lower than this. Certainly not number 1. We'll go with Vienna by Ultravox. I know it's a bit of a cheesy, obvious pick, but this track just means so much to me. I've got a great memory associated with it of going to a birthday party when I think I was about 9 years old, and we would go, and it was in a house in the village where I lived, and it was a big, dark, cold, drafty kind of house, and me and my friends were in there, and we got talking about it, and the girl whose house it was, she said, oh yeah, this house is haunted, you know, we hear strange noises in this house all the time. And I felt a chill down the back of my neck. It was that kind of experience, and it just so happened that it was Top of the Pops or some TV program on that night that was playing music, and that was the first time I ever heard Vienna, which is this very ghostly, spooky, wonderfully atmospheric song with a great video, a great iconic video, which anybody who was around at the time, who was a kid, will recall that video and what a massive impact it made. But the track itself, just so beguiling, so effective, and I guess a band that had had a post-punk incarnation in the John Foxx era. I think he'd been interested in electronics himself, but they went off in a much more synthy direction. I also love from this record the song Hymn as well, which is also a great synth pop classic. But Vienna by Ultravox, I think it's the greatest British synth pop song ever, and I will not hear a word said against it, so that's why I'll put it at number 1 for today. So there we go. I hope you enjoyed the video. Do share with me any of your synthy favourites, and check out Chris at the Vinyl Orchard as well. So if you enjoyed the video, let me know. Bye for now.